I see something happening. Colby,
Hey,
hey, I am so sorry about the rough start to this.
oh, you're all good.
I am, oh shoot, hold on here. I'm trying to turn up the volume on this thing and I don't know what I'm doing. All right, Colby,
What's up, Mac?
not much. How you doing?
Doing good yourself?
Doing good. Doing good. Hanging in there. Things have been having a strange morning.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I was describing the series that I'm doing, which is basically to Midgard, and it is where I interview Norse pagans and such. And so I am interviewing you. I want to make sure I'm getting your. This is the first time we've like talked. So
Well,
so
I do have to ask because on my end, I can't see either of us.
well, you look glorious, by the way. I gotta say.
Well, I mean, I figured I had to fit the part, right?
Right? Yeah. Yeah. So I want to be sure I'm saying your name correctly, last name correctly. Hartke.
Yep, you got it.
Okay, Colby Hartkey. So I want to give you a nice little introduction here, and then we'll get going on this whole thing. I know you're going at this blind, but hey, Loki, God of chaos, the trickster, right? It'd only be fitting that this would be happening, right?
It would. I mean, I had to get my official cosplay outfit on just to, get in the vibe.
Righto, I love it. Looks great. So I'm just going by what I know from you, and so correct me on any of this information if it's wrong. But you are Gothi, which is priest, correct?
Correct.
You're a healer, Vitki, and you practice the runes, like rune meditation, rune healing. Basically, uh, translated, Valdar Runar is like you were chosen by the runes to heal with the runes. Is that correct?
So you can do a lot of things with that practice, Father Methrunar. You can charge objects. You can use it for just any really array of different type of magical practices. Because really, it translates to empower with runes. So
Okay.
whether it's doing healing magic or it's protection wards, any of the quote unquote white magic, as most people commonly call it, you can definitely do a lot more with it as well. You can do binding spells and things like that as well.
Like from the craft, I bind you, Nancy, from doing harm.
we won't get
Iconic.
in, we won't get into that too much side of the Loki aspect.
So let's dig a little bit about your background. So tell us a little about yourself. You married, kids? Where do you live?
So I live in Martinsburg, West Virginia right now with my fiance. We've just haven't gotten everything in order to get our wedding officially planned. But I have three wonderful stepkids, and the oldest is currently in high school. He's JV football, and his team is doing phenomenal. Just found out that he really is getting into metal music, which just kind of hits home really close for me because it's always been my music. The His name is Aiden. My second one is Nikki. He's kind of getting into football, music wise. He's more kind of Eminem rap style. And then we have Savannah, our youngest, who's 8. And we jokingly call her our demon offspring. She definitely fits the redhead personality very well.
So there's got to be one, at least one, right?
Well, yeah.
It wouldn't be the same if there wasn't a little
No,
excitement.
it'll be interesting, and I'll bring up, kind of more connections a little bit later in this interview as far as them and all that goes. But yeah, it's definitely quite the interesting story how things all played out.
That's cool. Nice little mixture in your family. That's awesome. How long have you been Norse pagan? I used to say, how long have you been practicing? But someone was like, well, I don't really practice it. It's just something I do every day. And, it's really hard to even say that it's like a faith or a religion, because it's really just a way of life that you do every day, just to incorporate it into your life. But how long have you been this way?
So officially, openly identifying since 2020, but was really called to the path in fall of 2015. It was the most intense spiritual experience that I can recall off the top of my head. I was working at my grandparents' barn at the time, taking care of the horses, and I heard a weird noise. I don't know what it was, and it didn't scare me by any means. It was just unsettling. And without any thought, I just opened my mouth, and the first thing that came out was Odin be my guide.
Wow.
Instantly, that sound stops, and I just feel this powerful presence around me. And my only thought was, oh crap. And not knowing Odin like I do now, I'm like, my first thought was, please don't kill me. I don't know what to do here. But yeah, that was probably the most profound experience I've had, and things have happened my entire life since I was 10. Growing up in a Christian, very heavily Lutheran Catholic home, very much going to church, being told to go to church and all that. And for the longest time, I never actually wanted to follow the path I'm on now, which makes the whole journey very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I was, at one point, I stopped going to church, and I just kind of was more or less atheist and didn't want to work with religion, spirituality, any of that. Didn't want to work in medicine, and well, here I am. Norton's like, yeah, good luck, have fun.
Growing and maturing, if you're open to learning, it just leads you down to like this all different paths and stuff, and acquiring that knowledge and turn that knowledge into wisdom. And I think that's a very natural pagan thing to do, so even if
Right.
it's not, if you weren't influenced by that at a young age, a lot of people in the United States, especially growing up under the Christian influence, I think it's just natural for us to have that. Everyone has those pagan roots to go and want to explore those things. And so some do, some don't, and that's their own path to choose,
Yeah,
but
100% agree. And it's interesting as time has gone on to just connect with more who talk more about their experiences and things that they've gone through and what called them to their journey.
mhm, absolutely. Absolutely. Great. And so how do you identify as far as terminology goes? Do you say Norse pagan, heathen pagan? I know you're not Wiccan. Or are you?
Well, I guess that really depends on how you define Wiccan. If you define it in the traditional sense, you could use that term. But usually it's heathen or Norse pagan or just pagan in general. But I mean, if we go with it, like I said, the traditional sense of what Wicca means, then yeah, I mean, being a Vitki is very much being a Wicca, being a witch, a male witch. So,
Mhm.
I mean,
So,
I could see people saying that, but I think that just kind of depends on their understanding of terminology.
mhm. Okay, cool. So you'll go by whatever is just there at the moment, right? That's working, right?
Yeah, more lately, I have some people who do just refer to me as a Gothi, some who will refer to me as a Vidki, some will use the term of witch, but more lately, and this is a very interesting aspect, is a lot of people have been identifying more as a shaman, which
Mhm.
the idea of shamanism has, when I first actually opened my mind to exploring any type of beliefs and I started learning about the practices of shamanic ways, mostly the animistic view and soul retrieval being the biggest thing that called to me. It's just like getting these people, they're like, okay, I can kind of see you as quote unquote a shaman. Like it felt right.
Mhm.
And to those people that do identify me as that, it seems to feel right for them too. But I'm not particularly picky.
Yeah. You're not picky, you're Vitki. I'm kidding. So,
Well played.
and shamanism is kind of, I think it's great because it covers, I mean, it goes into a lot of different backyards, you know, it just really, it's like every pagan um, belief has that role of a shaman in it. So it's, you know, not just specific to one faith or one practice. So.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of cultures that, whether or not they use the term shaman, there's a lot of that influence in their culture and their practices for sure.
Mhm. Absolutely. So we did touch a little bit on it, but what drew you to the path? I know it was a scary moment in a barn. No, I'm kidding. But were there things leading up to this? You know, what really drew you that you felt connected to this?
That exact moment was, and I remember this very detailed. At the time, I had my very first Mjolnir, which was made out of sterling silver, and I was thinking, okay, let me just put on a different pendant because at this time, my long journey of, and I guess I should back up a little bit. What led me fully up to this was briefly in around 2009, I had a Reiki session performed on me. And that's what really opened my mind back up. I started researching, studying, just trying to get a better understanding of things. Spent some time with my first Reiki master, who was a Melchizedek priestess. My second Reiki master was former Jewish rabbi in training, but left that finding ties to the Yanomami people of Brazil and did a lot of shamanic work. So spent some time with an Andes Mountain shaman on a 30-minute workshop, just learning how to journey, a Taoist priest, and a Tibetan Buddhist monk. That was before 2015, so that just kind of started building up. But after that experience, there's one day I went to go take off my old Mjolnir and put on a Labradorite pendant. The very first song that happens to come on my radio on shuffle was called Ragnarok, Twilight of the Gods. And I just thought, maybe I shouldn't take this off. So I went back, I put my Mjolnir back on, and that night I had a very, very vivid dream of Thor just standing in front of me, just not directly upset and angry at me per se, but it kind of got that sense of, what are you doing? This is what
Right.
you need to follow. And I didn't quite understand it then until I put thought into it. But that was that true pivotal moment of, okay, this is what I need to follow. This is what I'm being called to.
Right. Yeah.
It was, I will say though, seeing Thor mad is not a pretty sight at all. It definitely lives up to the lore. Hope
Yeah.
I never see that God mad at me or anyone I know. Whew.
So that does, I didn't ask this question, but some people refer to the gods as not real gods or physical beings, but as elements. And then some do refer to them as real, beings of sorts. And I know that everyone has their own personal gnosis on that and such, but interesting to think what you think about that.
I mean, I can definitely see where people see them as more an embodiment or aspect of certain things of nature in the universe. Just everything I've experienced leads me to the view that they are actual entities and that they're just such multi-dimensional beings that to truly understand is not an easy feat. And I don't think personally that anyone can truly understand that concept of what a god is or a goddess is. But just in my experience, the different voices when they speak to me or the different ways that they've done things leads me to see as more of an actual entity, like I said, versus an embodiment of something.
Right. That is really cool, and that was awesome to hear. Love that. So we now know a little bit about you, um, and now one of the things when I just being your friend, um, one of the things that first things that pops into my mind when I think of you is Loki. Loki, Loki, Colby, and Loki. So
Yeah.
that that brings us to today's topic of why Loki. And the thing is you're not alone on this. You are not alone. There's a whole, you know, a whole section of almost like a sect of people dedicated to Loki. Um, and I just want to start this off and give this disclaimer to before we start that everyone's practice is and their belief is their own. There's no, I don't believe there should be a condemnation of any sort based on a preconceived notion of a deity or a god, you know. And I think that a lot of people that have converted from Christianity to Norse paganism often identify Loki as like a devil type character. So we're
Yeah.
going to kind of dive into that today, and give an explanation. And obviously, Loki is not an equivalent of the devil, and we're going to learn about this today. And we're going to jump right into it right now. So, Colby, who is Loki?
So first off, to kind of go back to the why Loki, just for the pure, chaos comedy of him, because I'm burdened with glorious purpose.
Mm.
Um, but so why Loki and who is Loki? The connections with him and I really began when I was down in Florida working at a vet practice, and Marvel became a lot more popular with everybody there. And at one point, a storm was coming through. My receptionist said, "Thor's here." Because at this time, I was a little bit more open in my beliefs. And that same coworker said, "You look like Loki," referencing obviously Tom Hiddleston.
Yeah.
So that's really where the nickname began. And that's why I got this cosplay outfit, because of that nickname, and just it's built from there. But I do agree that a lot of people tend to demonize him as an equivalent to some type of Norse devil, and it's not at all the same. I mean, for so many different reasons, yes, he can be very much an adversary to the gods, but there's so many times he benefits them. And I personally think a lot of people don't pay as much attention to the times he helps the gods and the things that he does to benefit them, whereas they just heavily focus on he's mischief, he's chaos, he's destruction in that aspect. He's,
And now,
I mean,
really quickly, though, I mean, but playing the devil's advocate, but Loki does, but it's not just Loki. There's several things that usher in Ragnarok, but at the helm of Ragnarok is Loki. And some people will see that as, why would I cheer someone on who's bringing the destruction of Earth and Midgard and the realms? And I have my own personal thought on that, because it's not destruction; it's a cycle. First off, but I do want to hear your kind of take on that. Why would someone honor a deity that ushers in Ragnarok?
and to go to your point of it being a cyclic event, and I think there's a lot of people that don't pay too much attention to that, and just in this society in general, looking at our calendars, the way we track time in history, it's very linear, whereas a lot of older cultures were cyclic. Obviously the biggest one most people know is the Mayan culture and the Mayan calendar. Ragnarok Ragnarok is very similar to that. And even in our lore, it states when everything ends, the world shall begin again. And that there are two humans that are hidden within Yggdrasil to start repopulating the earth. I find people don't focus on that. They just try to equate Ragnarok as an apocalypse. And it's
Right.
just everything ends, game over. Yes,
And
Loki obviously ushers in a lot of it, but that's where the duality of who he is as a god, as a deity, really come into play. He's chaos, but chaos is necessary. Chaos brings about change. Chaos brings about growth. If you're just,
innovation.
yeah, it can often even bring about inspiration
Mhm.
to some. I mean, if you just had everything constantly staying the same, but you're expecting the change, that's diving into the idea of insanity. Doing
Right.
the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. It's just not going to happen. So something at some point in a cosmic scale in our own personal lives has to change if we want something to be different.
Now you did hit on one thing, so the like people believing the in the apocalypse, and not even when you, and I do want to touch on that just a little because I think when you have this like doomsday mindset, you don't care to prepare for the future. But when you do have believe in a cyclic universe where there is a rebirth, you make plans. You plan ahead. There's hope, that's driven from that, and I think in that element, the Loki, despite ushering in, Ragnarok, also ushers in this era of hope, whether it's a benefit to it, and so I think it's a mindset as well.
Yeah, it very much can be. I mean, if we look at the notion of Ragnarok on a much smaller scale, you could make the debate of a very small personal Ragnarok occurs every day. I mean, just based on how we calculate time and track time. And by midnight tonight, wherever you're at in the world, this day's done. It's not coming back. But we have that hope and that expectation that a new day will come, a new dawn will come, and there's different things that can occur that day. Whether or not you're going to the same job and there's similarities, there's always that possibility for something new to come up.
Right.
And if you don't have that change, then what is there to look forward to? What is there to learn from, to grow from?
That is, wow. That is a very profound thought. I like that. Um, and I didn't even consider, the end of the day it's to be like that. And so that is a nice new path for me to consider and think about. So thank you for that. So,
Yeah,
but we are still talking about the whole who is Loki, and if and one of the things is he gained a lot of popularity because of the Marvel comics and the movies. But let's get a few things straight. Loki and Thor are not brothers.
no, they are not. Not even close.
So who is Loki in the pantheon of gods? Like, how did he come in to be able to sit at their table, get uninvited, and then come back?
Well, I mean, without extensive studies, and I encourage everyone to really, who's interested in the lore, regardless of what part on your path you're on, is to just revisit the lore,
Mhm.
revisit it, look at it again, take a new approach, and see how it speaks to you. Because, like you said earlier, everyone's path is different. But we know that based on the written lore we have, at some point, Loki and Odin made a blood brother oath to each other. And in part of that oath, Odin will not drink unless Loki is at least offered.
Mhm.
So in that context, Loki would be more of a brother to Odin than he would be to Thor.
Exactly. Yeah.
Tying back to Stan Lee and Marvel, though, just for clarification on how that all came about. And I watched an interview on YouTube with Stan Lee, of course, when he was still alive, stating he dug into the Norse lore some degree to get an understanding, but a very basic understanding of the gods and how to create it in his own way. The reason he wrote it was just to bring awareness back to our gods,
Hmm.
because there's Disney has Hercules and Zeus and all the Greek gods. There's mentions of the Roman gods, but at the time in his mind there wasn't much mention of the Norse gods. So I suggest everyone take for a grain of salt his portrayal of them, because it is
Right.
still Stan Lee, it was still Marvel, it was still for entertainment.
Right. 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 So we have a basic understanding of Loki now. So, so Loki, some people do not consider Loki to truly be, or just think that he shouldn't be considered in the pantheon of gods. That he's because he's Jotun, um, because he basically kind of appears out of nowhere. Is he Aesir? He's definitely not Vanir, the whole bit. So there's this whole thing of like, should Loki be included in the pantheon? What's your take on that?
I mean, depending on how you view things, I mean, I view the Jotunar, the Vanir, and Asir as different clans of gods. So they're all in that category of how we classify a god or goddess. But knowing that Farbauti and Laufey are his parents that are Jotunar, yes, he would be Jotunar. In my view, I view the Asir as more gods of order of the cosmic level. And the Vanir are gods of order of more natural things in the natural world. And the Jotunar are gods of chaos, because again, we need that chaos to bring about change and growth in different aspects to our level. I understand how people don't see him as a god, considering that he's Jotunar, and considering that if you really dig apart how Snorri, who wrote most of our lore, of course, that we have available, viewed the Jotunar as inherently evil beings. And even that Emil himself, or Argylmil, for those who don't know, that is more of his proper Jotun name, that he's an evil thing. And
Right.
taking that, all the influences Snorri had in his upbringing, his background, his personal views. I think this idea of good and evil is a construed viewpoint where it's back to order and chaos, duality
Hmm.
of forces that need to be present. So, yeah, I personally view him as a god.
Hmm. And I know we've been talking about this as well, the element of chaos, and I true, in the pantheon of gods. I myself too consider Loki to a god in the pantheon, but as an element, is he strictly just chaos? Or, do you think he represents, is it a broader spectrum of chaos that with a lot of different facets to it?
I would definitely say there's different facets, and I know there's a lot of people that tie him to the element of fire. There's times when he's associated with it, but it's one of those things where we need to keep in mind the difference between an association versus true attestation of that aspect, regardless of who the god is. But chaos is definitely his predominant thing. I mean, that's what he's most known for. But I think a lot of people also don't view the beneficial times when he is helping the gods, when he's doing things that ultimately do help him despite the chaos he causes.
Hmm.
Hi, Charles, by the way.
What? So, in in Norse paganism, he's definitely the element of chaos.
Yeah.
If we could go back and sit with the gods, the newly created nine realms, and the whole bit, how do you think Loki? What relationship with Loki? What relation does he have with the other gods? So, like, do you think they see him coming and they think, "Oh crap, here comes Loki,"
There
or do you
probably
think
definitely
they
there
think
probably
like,
definitely is a degree of them thinking, "Oh, great, here we go again."
um, and Thor often travels with Loki. Why do you think that is?
Well, that kind of ties back into some of our lore, and one uh, of probably a good story that ties into that too is the creation of the gift of the gods, the creation of Mjolnir, Sif's hair, Odin's ring, Gopnir, and Gungnir, all those wonderful things he created. As far as we know, Thor would not have Mjolnir had Loki not done what he did.
Exactly.
So I think there's a degree where, yes, he is chaotic and there's that distrust of him by the other gods, but also that aspect of, I could kind of use his cunning wit and his sly, deceptive nature to my advantage at times.
Mm. And on that note too, there's often an element of like wonderful things that come out of chaos. Chaos is not always it's not purely just a destructive force that leaves destruction in its path. Like much like a storm, after a storm hits, the ground is revitalized again, and then there's new growth. And in the same way, like you said, with the gifts to the gods, that was a factor in the chaos. Something that a product that came from that chaos.
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously, just since we brought up storms, I mean, all those affected by the hurricanes lately in any way, shape, or form, my best wishes to all of you, and hopefully things settle down. But on a more connecting scale, I guess, for lack of better terms, and tying back into that association with Loki and fire. And I know, obviously, Mac, you being out there in California, you probably have better insights on it. But the wildfires that occur out there,
Oh yeah.
and things get scorched, but then that lays the groundwork for new growth to come.
Hmm. The soil is actually ends up being better because of the element of fire that passed through in the end. It's healthier.
Yeah.
Yes, it's destructive, but in the cycle of it all, it does bring a rebirth, a healthier rebirth, to that. So, kind of going back to nature, because the gods, on top of just their entities and such, each god generally has some sort of tie to nature, an element of nature. Um, and I know you hit on fire, but I think possibly it could go. Well, I know it goes beyond that. Storms, like flooding. Just nature acting in her normal way.
Right.
Um, so, what other like natural elements of nature would you tie Loki to?
I mean, just I would say the unpredictability that nature can unfold and the wide range of just different aspects on how it shapes not only our reality but also our landscape. And I'll reference this to the time he was bound under the earth, because that's in our lore when the gods were having a feast and they kind of had enough of his games and picking on him, and they decided, all right, well, you're going to be bound under the earth. bound by the entrails of his other kids that are not commonly mentioned, and how Sigyn, his faithful wife, sat there collecting this venom from this snake that would constantly drip on his head like Chinese water torture. It just sounds terrible on so many different levels.
Hmm.
But every time she had to empty the bowl, it would drip on his head, causing him to shake. And that is the lore behind what caused earthquakes.
Hmm.
So there could be that aspect too of the shifting of tectonic plates being tied to him moving around, struggling in pain, shaping our landscape on a very different level.
Hmm. And on that note, this is one of the things I find so fascinating about Norse paganism, is because I truly believe it is, on top of that, a very scientific faith, on top of everything else. It's an explanation for how nature works, and it should have it, you have it being explained without the technology and the knowledge we have today. You have these explanations, and that was science in its purest form, when it first started. And I just think it's fascinating in that aspect.
It definitely is, and I had another interesting aspect to that too, and just the idea of magic as a whole versus science, and a lot of what we used to call back in older times as a human society we thought was magic was just science that we did not understand. And going to the idea of witchcraft and our magic practices like that, the best analogy that I think I've come up with to explain to people who don't understand it on a more scientific level is just like you and I talking right now. Obviously, we're on different sides of the country, yet our phones, or well, in my case, my phone, I think you're on your laptop, but these devices have frequency signals that can connect to each other and allow us to have this conversation right now, hundreds of miles apart. Magic can be applied in that same context. If you tap into the frequency and the soul of whoever or whatever you're trying to connect, who's to say you can't do things from a distance?
Right.
Why do you have to be right on top of things? And I think that's how the gods tend to, at least for me, interact a lot too, is in that trance state. You're in that frequency where your mind is set to different scales, different levels, to be able to talk, interact, alter, do things that you may not necessarily be able to do without that ability.
Right.
And so that is kind of a science, even though it is as much a mystery still today. I can only imagine how much of a mystery it was back then.
Right. Right. That is really cool. I like the way you presented that. So, Loki, why Loki? So we did hit a little bit about kind of what got you started on the whole Loki, but looking like him. As far as the movies, or as far as Tom Hiddleston's concerned. Um, but what is your personal connection to Loki? Because yeah, it might have started off as a little, joking around with stuff, but you really developed a personal connection with Loki. So let's. What is that connection, and how's it? How did it evolve to what it is today?
A lot of it stems back to the times when I really struggle with my mind, because I've struggled with depression, anxiety, and my mind still gets to me. It's gotten better over the years, but there's still those times, just like many of us struggle. And that family, as harsh as it sounds, it's a harsh reality. A lot of my own blood family, quote unquote, demonized me just for existing. That this mentality of I shouldn't be around, I'm not important. Um, just to clarify for those who are listening, watching, I really don't give a crap what they think anymore. So that's insignificant to the whole story. But just like with him, it's you walk around and it's like, oh great, here comes Loki, it's, oh great, he's the problem, he's the problem child, he's the chaotic one, the mischief one, and no matter what I did, it was always viewed that same way. And I think on a level he feels that same way too, that the times he tries to actually be beneficial, that he's still looked down upon as this just chaotic force that's not significant enough to really matter or be present around the other gods who are more that order. It's unfortunate reality, and just from a experience I had with him, and it's kind of comical because I was watching the Disney series on him, and it was at the end of the very first episode, he makes the comment, and Tom Hiddleston makes the comment, obviously portraying Loki, that I never wanted to be this way. And it's like, it's just that pain you could feel that he represented. And I could feel that too. Like, there's so many things that happened to me I didn't want either. And yet at the same time, I felt him reach down, and I'm gonna have to just, kind of one of those type of grabs, and I could just feel him like, you're not alone. I understand the things that you go through. So that's a big aspect that drew me to him too, was the understanding of what it's like to be viewed at in such a negative way, despite what you sometimes do to help.
Do you feel like you chose Loki, or did Loki choose you?
I definitely feel it's the latter of the two, that he chose me.
Yeah. And I bet that was comforting.
Yeah, it was. And the interesting aspects of my connection with him, this will really bring some probably interesting reactions too from many people. I'm sure you'll get a chuckle out of this. So going back to my three stepkids, I asked them one day, because if they want to follow this path, that's on them. Whatever path they want to follow, I always advocate, that's your choice. But every now and then we talk about the lore, and we were talking about the three most common children of Loki. Well, not Sleipnir. I mean, yes, he is common, but Hel, Jormungandr, and Fenrir.
Right.
And I asked the kids who would be who. He gave them a general, brief explanation. Savannah, a little 8-year-old redhead. Like, oh, I'd definitely be Hel. Like, yeah, that fits. That totally fits. You're kind of quote unquote demon offspring. That just fits. Yeah. Nikki, our middle child, he's actually, and we were talking about this the other day when we were visiting with him, and he showed me a couple of his teeth are a little bit sharper than most humans. And that's kind of Fang resembling. Like, well, there's Fenrir. And then Aiden, he's like 6 feet tall already at 14 years old.
Oh my gosh.
He's taller than, yeah. I was like, well, Jormungandr, you're the biggest of them.
It'd only be fitting that this works out for you like this.
Yeah. And my fellow Gothian good friend Ben Carr, we have so many conversations about our connections with our chosen gods, and he made the comment one day. He's like, I just realized something. I'm like, what's that? He goes, Ashley's your Angerbolda. Like, did you just now figure that out? Like, you've met the kids, you've been around them. More interesting though, and this is where I'm really expecting a good chuckle from a lot of people. My mother, love my mother. She was talking to some friends, and she's big into the horse community. Does a lot of venting. She makes the comment completely by mess up one day. Let me explain this first. One of her horses' name is Donkey. Okay. Why, I don't know, but that's what they decided to name him. She makes the comment one day, yeah, my son Donkey. Interesting. So you gave birth to a horse mother? sounds kind of like a flashback there.
Maybe you can give birth to a horse now.
Hey, careful, I might neigh.
Oh my gosh. That is rich. That's awesome.
So
So
yeah, I thought that was an interesting connection to him as well. Obviously the story of the birth of Sleipnir and Loki, and my mother making that slip up comment. I'm like, great.
it fits,
It,
hey.
it, if shoe fits, right?
Right, exactly. So
Uh,
Loki, obviously, amongst the gods, had a reputation. There's a handful of gods that have like a reputation, and then there's Loki with this extreme reputation. Now, a lot of practitioners today have a negative outlook on Loki still. And I think it's just again that understanding of of equating chaos to evil, or they're haven't fully been freed of that Christian mindset that there has to be a devil, there has to
yeah.
be a Satan, and so this would be the Satan. So I think there's a lot of that misunderstanding, but as people grow and they learn and they start to know more about it, about Loki, um, I personally don't believe he deserves that negative reputation, but it persists. Why do you think in the Norse pagan community that this negative reputation of Loki persists time after time after time after time? After all this time, it's
Well,
still there.
like you said, there's a lot of misunderstanding of who he is, what he represents, and even just referencing back to like the creation of the gifts of the gods and Mjolnir, like, yes, okay, he cut off Sif's hair. That made Thor mad, and Thor threatened to kill him. He ultimately went to the dwarves and said, like, I need you to create these gifts. They agreed on one condition, and that condition was Loki's head if the gods were appeased. As the story unfolds, the gifts were being created. They were fantastic. And Loki said, basically, I can't let them win because I'm going to lose my head, right? So he tries to distract them, distract Sindri and Brok, and make Mjolnir shorter than it should have been and how it was originally intended. Ultimately, the gods were still appeased with their gifts, and the dwarves said, well, we won this competition. We get your head. So, but in order to get my head, you have to cut my neck. That's not part of the deal. So there's this trickery aspect of, is he somebody you can truly trust? And I think that are those are the types of things that people tend to focus on, versus in referencing another good story of him and kind of going back to Sleipnir is the builder and the wall of Asgard. It was getting close to being done, like 5 days until it was, or 5 days ahead of schedule. The gods
Mhm.
essentially looked at Loki and were like, "This is your fault. Fix it, or we're going to kill you." And
Yeah.
he's like, "Well, okay." I mean, in that situation, what options do you have? You either figure something out or you're dying.
Right.
And I think that's an interesting way in him just being very pragmatic and realistic. Like, I got to do something. So yes, turning into a mare, distracting Svadilfari, the builder's horse, running off into the woods, ultimately causing the builder to fail.
Mhm.
And the wall of Asgard would not have been present had these events not occurred. So I think too many people, just like I said, focus on the things he's done that make people upset, make the gods upset, that cause chaos, versus looking at the beneficial things that he does.
Right. And there's that whole, they're not focused on the end result, and they're
Right.
focused on everything that could go wrong has gone wrong,
Right.
you know, and that's I think of something that is also a mindset of, like this week I was casting runes, and it was just like this element of chaos was just persistent throughout the entire reading, is all week long, but it was the being able to navigate the chaos, which will produce or result in something good, productivity, of a good end result. So it's also a mindset of where we're putting this focus,
And I think that's a big aspect of him on what he can help people learn is how to navigate through that chaos and learn the lessons that are within it, as well as seeing the good things that can come out of it.
So, and it doesn't matter what anyone says. For some
Yeah.
reason, Loki's always going to have this reputation. It's just going to be there. But I think forums like this and being able to teach people about the deity of Loki is good. And hopefully this provides insight to some people, changes some concepts
And
there.
I mean, end of day, that's all we can really do is just say, look, these are the stories, these are the lessons that we can learn. These are my viewpoints. You take it for what you will. It's your path. Whatever you think is right, that's your path. And just on that context, like one thing I will always stand by 100% is it's a harsh reality, but end of day, nobody knows what's going to happen when we die. There's
Mm,
reality that everything could be completely fabricated in our minds, or the other reality is that every belief that's ever existed could be a reality. We don't know. So take it for what you will, but also try and learn and look at the stories, look at the lessons, and figure out how can you apply those things to your life, especially when
mhm.
those chaos times come. Okay, yes, this is unfortunate, this sucks, but what can I do to improve my situation or the situations around me through this? What gifts can I give back to the people or to myself to help make things better?
Agreed. Yeah, that's really good. Well put. Well put. So we know that we talked about a little bit earlier, without chaos, there's no change. Everything is stagnant and remains the same. And chaos also brings, an array of benefits as well, and to that effect. So what would you say to like people who, you know, condemn the worship of Loki, or still continue to condemn Loki? What would be the message you would have for them?
If that's your belief, if that's your path, that's your path. Let others believe what they think is right.
Mm,
Plain and simple.
yeah. So, Loki is presented in a lot of sagas. A lot of the sagas, you're going to find Loki. And he even has, a whole section dedicated just to him because of the ushering in of Ragnarok. What is your favorite saga of Loki, and why is it your favorite?
That's an excellent question, and it's hard to isolate just to one particular saga of him. And but if I really had to put a lot of thought into it, and I know I've kind of referenced this story a few times already, but it seems like it really goes to show the duality of his nature, and that's the creation of the gifts of the gods. I mean, it's just such a fascinating story, and like I said, we, as far as we know, Thor wouldn't have Mjolnir had it not been for Loki. Odin would
Mm,
not have Draupnir and Gungnir had it not been for Loki. Uh, Skithbrothnia and all these other great gifts would probably not have existed. So I think it's
right.
just a good story of how he both hinders and helps the gods at the same time.
Mhm. That is, yeah, that's definitely one of my favorite stories. So one of my favorite Loki stories that has got to be Idun and her the golden apples, and because of that has this cascading effect. One small little thing led to such bigger and bigger things, all the way, to Scotty, and you're like, wow, that that took a twist, that took a turn, but you
Yeah.
basically initiated because once again, Loki had to, he was being dragged on the ground, begging for his life. What are you gonna do? Yes, I'll give you I'll give you the golden Edun and the golden apples. Of course, I will. you know.
I think another really good story of him is when Thor lost Mjolnir.
Oh my gosh.
you know, for all those people, and I say this obviously for those who don't know me well enough, the utmost respect for anybody in the LGBTQ plus community.
Uh,
My page, is a safe place. Those of you who know me, have already experienced this, but it's a fascinating story in how resistant Thor was on cross-dressing,
right.
so he could get his hammer back. Yet how persistent Loki was, and all the times he shapeshift, like, who cares? And I think that's a big focus that could benefit those people in that community. Is like, who cares what other people think?
Right.
I'm still going to do it. I'm still going to be me.
Loki was very fluid. I mean,
Yeah.
he transformed into a mare, a bridesmaid. I mean, he gave birth as a mother, as in that entity, that in that form. So as far as in that aspect, Loki isn't just the chaos. He's a fluidity that allows people this um, expression in a very gray area that a lot of people see.
Yeah. And, thinking more about just the different sagas that pertain to him. And I know this is kind of backtracking about the demonization of him. This is just my intake on it. So obviously take what you will. But the death of Balder
Mm,
is a very interesting story if you really look at it. That everything was that Frigg made everything promise not to hurt Balder except for a mistletoe,
right.
because she basically thought it was too small and insignificant. Loki hears this and goes, all right, let's have fun, right? Obviously, very loosely putting that, but fashions some type of projectile, whether some say it's a spear, some say it's an arrow, some type of projectile out of mistletoe, gives it to Holdo, who's blind, and says, hey, throw this at him, it'll be fun. Instead of hearing the clank of it falling down, hitting the ground, there's the thud, and Balder falls over and dies. Everything, ultimately, the journey down to Hel to speak with her. If everything but for his return for him, he would be allowed to return before Ragnarok. Loki, of course, being depicted as Thok at the time, would refuse to weep.
Mhm.
The interesting thing I find about that story, and this goes back to that demonization of him, everyone blames Loki for that. Yes, he definitely had a factor to that equation. But if you really, really look into it, who's the one who failed to make mistletoe promise?
Right. Right. There.
The only
Uh,
reason that was able to be fashioned was not because of Loki. He just took advantage of the situation. So
why do you so two things on that. That's such a great um, saga, mm, all in all, especially getting into develops more character into Balder that you see and Other. But the my one question is, why do you think it was that Loki refused to weep in the form of folk?
probably jealousy. I mean,
Yeah.
Balder was the most beloved of all the gods, and all the crap that Loki gets, he was probably just jealous and didn't want to feel alone. Didn't want to feel like he was just an outcast.
Hmm.
And I think that's the big concept of who he is too, is he just wants to be accepted.
Right. And like you said, it wasn't Loki's fault that Balder was indestructible. Why isn't the blame placed on the oversight? You know, and that I think that ties into the gods have a very human nature, and that's
Yeah,
something that we can relate to. Of course, I'm
yeah,
not going to blame myself. It must be this. It must be this. Well, the oversight was yours, you
yeah.
know.
Yeah, no, I agree. The gods definitely have a very human quality, and I think that's why so many people come to this path and start to follow it, is because of the idea of imperfection. That nothing is perfect, but that doesn't mean you can't be something bigger than what you were taught to believe, or bigger than what you think you could be. But I mean, again, I think so many people just focus on, well, Loki's fault because it's Loki. That
Right,
he's basically the devil of Norse mythology, and despite that being a false idea on him, I don't think people take enough time to really read the lore, to look at the lore, and look at all the fine details that we have available. I mean, when I talk about the story, I often reference, well, if somebody gave you a spear or any type of weapon, whether even if it's something like a knife, and said, "Hey, go stab this person," if you do it, whose fault was it?
right,
You're the one who committed that act, so you have blame. Yes, somebody gave you the opportunity to do it, so there's some fault to them, but ultimately, you're the one that took that action.
right.
And you need to take responsibility for your actions, whether they are good or whether they are bad. Take responsibility.
Absolutely. Which is actually a big concept in Norse paganism, because if you think about it, there's no concept of sin, because there's sin is a transgression against a god, you know, and that concept doesn't exist with us, because there's no such thing as perfection or a perfect god in the pantheon or anything like that. So that is just an obsolete concept. It's a non-existent concept for us as Norse pagans.
Right.
But the concept is you, you should be responsible for your actions. You know what is right. Inherently, people know what is right, know what is wrong, and you should be responsible and accountable for your own actions. So I think that's a huge difference between, paganism and the Abrahamic
Yeah,
faiths.
yeah, 100%. There's a definitely a big difference in that. And I mean, if we were to equate anything to this concept of sin in the Abrahamic viewpoint, I would have to say it's breaking an oath, but intentionally breaking an oath versus life happening and you can't uphold that oath because something blocked you, whether you want to review it as some external, supernatural force or not, or just some mundane thing. I think that's different than if you were to just willingly break that oath and just say, you know what, I don't care anymore. And that would be probably my best equate to what a concept of sin would be in our lore.
Absolutely. So, wow, we covered quite a bit, and if you think about it, we really, I feel like it's just scratching the surface, because there's so much that goes into each deity, and I think Loki himself has so much more than a lot of others, um, and I think a big part of this is the concept that life does not sail smoothly, nor should it. It's not, nature isn't designed that way. Chaos is a natural element of nature.
Yeah.
And that's something that Loki embodies and it represents. So in that regard, it should be expected, and prepared, and you learn how to navigate through those things. So people equating, Loki is the equivalent of the devil, I think is completely just off the mark
I,
completely, because
I,
it's not a good or
I
evil thing.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. I mean, yes, he's a big factor to causing Ragnarok, and he does a lot of terrible things, but he's not a scapegoat. I mean, the gods all the gods have to take responsibility for their own actions, no
Hmm.
matter who they are. So, no, he's not a scapegoat, and he shouldn't be viewed as one.
Right. Exactly. Dang, Colby, thank you so much for taking time out today and discussing this. Introduce some new thoughts for me as well. So I definitely learned, and so I appreciate that
Of course,
very,
happy
very
to
much.
help. And I appreciate you taking the time to do this as well.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts or comments that you would like to give the audience?
You
Oh,
know, there's one thing that I saw that Charles actually commented, and is kind of backtracking to the idea that none of our gods are all good or all bad, and that's very much an Abrahamic concept and construction of good versus evil.
mm,
So I just thought that was very interesting too that he mentioned that, and also he said he heard an interesting UPG that Loki wanted to create balance by killing Balder, and that's actually something I never thought about. So that's something I'm going to take away from him and his comment and consider when I revisit the lore again on a different approach on that.
right.
So Charles, I know you're there. Thank you for bringing those up.
Yes, thank you, Charles. Those are great, like profound concepts.
Yeah,
So yeah, Colby, again, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it so much, and for
sure.
sharing your journey, your knowledge, and I look forward. I'm sure this will not be the last interview I have with you, so stay tuned for that for another invite back. But so yeah, I'm doing this twice a month. I have Sanford Kaufman up in a couple weeks. We're going to be talking about inclusion in Norse paganism, so that would be good. Got a lot of people lined up. Ryan Smith, the author of The Way of Fire and Ice. Robin Ardenson, I use his version of the Havamal. Uh, um, it's just Topher is going to be on. Will Phillips, a lot of people I have lined up, so it's going to be really, really good.
Well, I
I'm
look
excited.
forward to those.
Yeah, and definitely I will be having you back. I learned so much from you today too, so it's going to be good.
Well, the last thing I'll say as far as a closing, just for all those who are listening actively or those who hopefully will see it down the road, is just, especially since you mentioned, and I know Sanford has a lot of ways he can talk about inclusion. I mean, yes, it is an inclusive faith. It's not a closed practice. I don't care, and I'm going to title drop here, which is not something I normally do
Mhm.
because I'm not that egotistical. But I'm going to title drop as a Gothi. I don't care what your sexuality is. I don't care what the color of your skin is. I don't care about that. If you feel called to this path, follow it. It is
Absolutely.
your calling. It is your path. Don't listen to anybody who says you can't, because they're just ignorant and they're blinded by their own ego and insecurities, in my opinion.
Ego is, I'm telling you, ego is a big, big deal. It's a big stumbling block for a lot of people in regards to inclusion.
Yeah.
So you hit the nail on the head with that. And I couldn't agree with you more. I could not agree with you more. I mean, I could, and I will. So I will agree with you more. But thank you so much for your time,
Sure.
Colby. I hope you have a great weekend, and I will talk to you again soon.
All right. Take care, Mac.
All right, you too. Bye.
Bye bye.